Dragons Dogma 2 is right around the corner, 22nd of March to be specific, and we've had the last round of previews from a lot of different outlets and creators, as well as some interviews with the director of the game, Itsuno, that gave us a lot more information. Some of it very good, a lot of it very controversial, and some of it disappointing. Since those previews went out and those interviews have been had and then they are all being translated from their original languages and all of that, there's just a lot of information here. There is a lot to cover, so hi, I'm Mugthief, let's get into it, and we're going to start off with the confirmation that there are only 10 vocations in the game, and this one is already very strange. Now, as a recommendation from me to you, if I may, please take this as truth. Think that there are these 10 vocations, these are the options in the game. Do not go into this game thinking that there is anything else. Even though I'm going to talk about how I don't think this is true or how it shouldn't be true and this is just confusing, but go in with that idea so that it's better to be surprised than it is to be disappointed. So that's the info. There's 10 vocations, the ones we know about. That is the fighter, the archer, the thief, and the mage for the base classes, and then for the advanced vocations we have warrior and sorcerer. For hybrid vocations, we have the magic archer, the mystic spearhand, the trickster, and finally the warfarer, which is the jack of all trades. In this one interview that could potentially be mistranslated, it could be Itsuno screwing up the marketing by saying that this is what's there at launch when maybe he wanted to say, I don't know, this is what we are willing to talk about at the moment. He confirms that this is what is in the base game. That is the wording. That means at the minimum that there's going to be more in not the base game, so we will see more in DLC or expansions or anything like that. However, this did come as a surprise to a lot of people, primarily because there's some very big holes in the vocation lineup. Most people assume that by changing to 4 base classes from the original game's 3, what we would get is 4 base classes, 4 advanced vocations, and their respective hybrid vocations among them, but that does not seem to be the case, and that leads to some problems, because if you like playing a thief, there is no advanced vocation for the thief. If you like playing archer, there is no advanced vocation for that. You are forced to become a magic archer. If you like playing with daggers, you're going to stay as the thief for the whole game. And most people were expecting at least advanced vocations or maybe just a hybrid vocation of archer and thief to exist that would allow people to go back to playing as the strider basically from the first game. Not only that, a lot of people, including myself, were really excited at the possible combinations of thief with mage or with fighter, and those simply do not seem to exist, and this entire thing just leaves more questions than it does answers. Many people, including myself, put out the theory that the purple and pink combination of colors for the hybrid vocation of the trickster, which as you can see, the hybrid vocations are a combination of the colors of the vocations they come from, does not have base classes. It doesn't have even advanced classes that come to it, and people have said, well, then it's just arbitrary colors. It just doesn't matter. They put in purple and pink. That doesn't make sense to me, because why would you put it in purple and pink and not just a solid purple and have it be an advanced vocation that you can do a side quest and pick up, which is how it seems we get it. Why make it hybrid? Now, you could say that they made it a hybrid vocation specifically because it is exclusive to the Arisen, but it still seems misleading and doesn't make much sense within the game and how it works, the rules of it, because they could have made it just like the Warfarer, right? Which is another Arisen exclusive vocation, but it's not hybrid. Not only that, but if we look at the icons, we can see that the 4 base classes have a very simple design to them, while the hybrid vocations and the advanced vocations have this little more elegant border, a little bit more detailing on it. And the Warfarer has this very big, crazy border, which makes it look like it's a definitive, like a third tier of vocation, but it's there by itself, and it's also the jack of all trades one. Could this all be because of no reason, just because of potato, because it exists? Yes, that's what I'm choosing to believe, that this is probably just set up to prepare for DLC or for additional stuff that's coming down the road, but it's still very confusing. It'll be interesting to see if this is the case, and again, I want you to believe that it is 100%. Don't be disappointed by it. Don't go in searching for secret vocations. If there are secret vocations, if there is extra stuff, don't worry. We will probably know it by launch with how much people have been talking about this, but it's just a curiosity that, I don't know. Let me know in the comments below if any of this makes sense to you, because it's slightly confusing to me. But speaking about those vocations, I do want to touch a little bit on the combat. I was a little worried with a lot of other people that maybe they had dumbed down the vocations. Technically, you have less access to skills this time around, and I wanted to see how they were dealing with that, how much depth there was to them. And after watching a lot of those previews, I feel much better. And I'll leave a link in the description below as well to the interviews and everything in this video, to an Arix Gaming video where they did their preview. They played as the Mystic Spearhand and they talked about the Mystic Spearhand's vocation ability. Each vocation has a specific ability that is always mapped to R1 or the equivalent or right bumper. In the case of the Mystic Spearhand, that is the Redoubting Bolt. And in that video, they show off just how much that can change, how much its uses vary depending on what you choose, how it does a series of different things that are all very core to the identity of the vocation, but are all very different and show that customization to be alive and well. That makes me feel like there's going to be a lot of interconnectedness in the skills you choose and how your playstyle ends up being, that leads more to flexibility than it does dumbing down. Or at least that's my impression, again, from watching a lot of previews. If you've felt hesitant on that, I don't know if that's going to change your mind, but I at least am excited to play with these vocations, see what they can do, play around with them, and find some cool stuff. And speaking of dumbing down or making combat very complicated, in one of the interviews, Itsuno talks about the Warfarer and mentions how some people that have played it compare it to Devil May Cry 5 Dante. And remember that Itsuno is the director of Devil May Cry 3, 4, and 5, so it's a logical comparison to make. A lot of Dante's skill cap and expression in Devil May Cry 5 is based around how he can switch between any of his weapons at any point for you to maximize your damage output in any given situation, and you really need to learn how to switch between all of his options to maximize that. So hearing those comparisons around the Warfarer not only has me excited, but definitely confirms that if you want the flashiest playstyle possible, if you really want to be a master of this game, it seems like the Warfarer was designed for that. Once again, that might be why it has that really big border as if it is the ultimate class, because maybe that's the intention. You decrease your stats, but you have to play really well with all of the options available, be very familiar with all of the other 9 vocations in order to make the most of them, and that sounds very exciting to me. That sounds really fun. We also know from a separate interview that you can indeed equip all 9 of the weapons on a Warfarer and have access to them, which is, again, ridiculous. That would be knowing a lot of different movesets and a lot of different skills from each of those vocations and using them all. That's a lot. We're going to see some really cool gameplay clips coming up real soon after launch, I'm sure. So speaking of those interviews, we already knew from interviews a long time ago that the game map is approximately 4 times as big as the original, which was already half as big as it wanted to be. It might even be bigger than that, but one of my key questions was, how filled out is it? What is the game filled with? What is the design philosophy behind this open world? And we did get some answers from that in some interviews. What they do mention is how much of the world is filled out, how many different towns there are, how many different NPCs, how many different quests are available, and this is all very good because as we've seen more and more footage, a lot of my hesitation towards the game and what it might be, Itsuno returning to the open world genre on this new engine. There's been a lot of changes in how open worlds are designed since Dragons Dogma 1, but in the footage we've seen a lot more diversity, different areas. We've seen some lava caves, some river banks, some caves in general, some more man-made structures to explore. Seems like there's going to be a lot to this world and not just a big open map of wilderness with nothing to really see. And that is precisely the question that this interviewer asked, and I really like Itsuno's answer, that they focused on that density. They structured the open world in a way that you can see the location, you can see your goal, but you don't see a path to get to it immediately. He says that if you just see a straight road, then it becomes boring. So instead, the excitement comes from wondering how you're going to get there. That's some serious Zelda vibes there. And they really focused on having multiple different paths to reach those locations. So even if you have to travel back to them or back from them, you can take different paths with different enemies, different rewards, and even then, if you were to repeat the same path, that enemies would be placed differently and different events could happen. So it seems that at least from the philosophical perspective of how they're tackling this seems to be the right idea, or at least for me it is. He also talks about the quests, and this is really important regarding missable content, something that I keep talking about because I'm really excited for, and he talks about how you can miss stuff if you don't properly organize your quest log. Taking on a quest can lead to it having different consequences if you don't do it quick enough or depending on the decisions you make. They made a big deal of the example of faking a stone to give to somebody, but there seems to even be a pop-up, this screenshot that I found on Reddit, warning you that if you take a quest and you don't finish it fast enough, it might end poorly. or differently, I guess. Like having to rescue somebody, and if you take too long, then there will be nobody left to rescue. I love this idea that you will have different paths, different rewards, different outcomes that can potentially affect the game later on. I don't expect this to be super deep. I don't expect this to be Baldur's Gate and for every NPC in the world to remember every single thing you've done and that have some very big outcome towards the end. But I do like my choices having consequences and for me to be mindful of those choices when I make them, including not just filling up my quest log with literally everything that I come across and being like, yes, give me your quest, I want to do it. And then when I go and do it, it turns out I forgot to do it for 17 days and now that person is no longer alive. So that's cool. I know some people are not going to like that. I like that a lot. I made a whole video about why you might not like the game, but encouraging you to try it. And this is just more in that same line. And I hope to see even more of this in the game. So speaking on all of those things from interviews, the same interview where he talks about density, this is the one from the Reno Gazette Journal, link below the like button, is another interview where he gives a very strange answer to the vocation question. When asked, so far 10 vocations have been revealed, are there more vocations than that? He says, so currently we have 10 vocations announced, and that's as much as we currently have plans for at this point right now. Which is KG. Let's just say that. So there's 3 other important things I want to touch on from the interviews. The first one is the difference between playing as a human or a beast ren. They mentioned that there's going to be slight differences, but it's not going to be changing. The game will play out more or less the same with some small details throughout it changing due to that choice. So yes, while you can change what your pawn looks like, you can only do that within the same race because that does impact how people treat you and a couple of details in the story, but nothing major. 2 of the more controversial things coming from these interviews is one, how the armor system has changed. It has been simplified, apparently to give more diversity, and that looks like a huge contradiction because it is. Armor is now simply the top half, the bottom half, the cape, and your hat. That is what you can choose from. The original Dragons Dogma had a little bit more depth, a little bit more choice, and more pieces to select from. I'm simplifying because that seems to be the name of the game right now. And some people are very mad, but I wanted to combine this with how they talk about stat growth and how it's affected, because when talking about stat growth, they mentioned that they didn't want your stats to ever be capped, for you to continue to grow and grow and grow and not be dependent on your level ups for your stats to continue growing, which is a really interesting detail when you combine it with their motivation for changing the armor system to be something that allows for more diversity. And they mentioned that the higher level you are, the more armors that they want you to choose from. So it seems like a big focus of this game is having more freedom as you progress through the game. It really opening up, really like a tree. The further in you go, the higher up the branches, the more sprawling it all becomes in its choices. And that in the original game, it really did boil down to the meta armor sets and everybody was using what was considered the best. Which I guess means that they don't want to have an ultimate anything in this game. They want you to really tailor your build and choose armors based on different factors. On paper, all of that sounds great. That sounds like a fix. That's something that I prefer. I want the game to have a lot of diversity in endgame and for you to find different armors that could potentially make you reconsider how you're going to play the game and things like that. But that could have easily coexisted with the more complex armor system with more options from before and just having more pieces. Whether this is a simplification for simplification's sake, or if it's because of the amount of assets needed, or for game balance, or whatever it may be, it's still a little bit disappointing that we see something that was enjoyed before being simplified now. But at least the overall direction of how they're balancing armors and why they are there seems better, and that's good. So there's a little bit of good and a little bit of bad. The final controversial change where I really do want to weigh in on personally is on the difficulty. He says that it's a much harder game than the original, which the original for a lot of people was not easy, so I'm very excited to see exactly how that difficulty is. I'm a fan of smashing my head into the wall when playing video games because I'm just like that, I guess. But he mentions that there is an adaptive difficulty system, and a lot of people have been very angry at this. This is very strange to me considering that Capcom basically patented their own adaptive difficulty system so many years ago with Resident Evil 4. They patented it figuratively, not literally. This is not Warner Brothers and Shadow of Mordor. And I specifically think that something like Dragons Dogma can benefit very heavily from this. In a game that can be very punishing and that asks you to go out on a limb and go explore stuff and just see what happens, it makes a lot of sense that small different things would change that difficulty on the fly to make the overall experience better. Will this end up being manipulated by speedrunners? Yes, probably, but the intention is for you to have a good experience. We don't know the details of how this actually works, but I would assume that a good example is if you're very low on healing items and low on HP, the game will take it easy on what it decides to spawn or show you, or if there is something that is always there, it might make it easier to circumvent or might make that monster be sleeping so you have an immediate option to not just die. Adaptive difficulty doesn't mean, oh, we think you're bad, so we made this monster have less HP. Historically, when looking at what Capcom does, it's more about the drops, for example, dropping more healing items or more gold so that you can more easily stock up on healing items, or lowering the density of mobs or the aggression present from certain monsters if you're in a very dire position so that you don't feel frustrated all of the time, but the overall difficulty will be the same. If this is properly tuned, I think that this is the best solution possible for this game to avoid that frustration, instead of it being hard walls of progress that you encounter over and over again. That balancing will be key. If I go and grind and become over-leveled and have really good gear, I don't want enemies that were before easy to suddenly become hard. That's not how this balancing works. It's maybe that there's more of them or they're more willing to be aggressive, but that also means they leave more openings for me to dispatch them easily and stuff like that, without changing their damage numbers or without changing their HP numbers, so that you still feel that impact of, now I am stronger and have better stuff to use and I'm better at the game. But that's just my 2 cents. I do understand why people get mad, but it's not as black and white as it seems with an adaptive difficulty system. The whole point of them is to be invisible, and we will only really know about it if it goes wrong, or like I said, when speedrunners eventually exploit it to beat the game in an hour. But yeah, as I said, there's a lot of news, a lot of stuff to cover. I want to know your opinions down below. I very seriously doubt that there's going to be enough stuff for me to warrant a big news recap that I think is worth your time. So while we move closer to launch, I'll be doing, like I've done for other RPGs, a vocation guide, in this case, based on lore and things like that, and then preparing for the launch of the game itself. So remember to subscribe if you want more from me, be that Dragons Dogma 2 or other games. I've been Mugthief, thank you so much for watching, as always, and I will see you again very soon.